In this lecture, we're going to look in greater detail at the monopoly market structure. Just as review here, characteristics of a monopoly include the fact that a monopolist is a sole producer, the only one in the industry, so they're going to be exactly, again, opposite of the perfectly competitive market structure. And because there's only one producer in the industry, that producer is the entire industry. So with perfect competition, we had side-by-side graphs showing how the market supply and demand affected the individual representative producer. But when we're studying monopoly, there's only one graph to deal with because the producer is the entire industry. The product type is a unique product with no close substitutes. And the monopolist has total price setting power. They are known as price makers. But they can't ignore the demand curve for the product. So if they want to charge a high price, they have to realize they might sacrifice some sales. And if they want to sell more, they still have to. They'd have to lower the price and able to be able to do that. And the demand curve for the product is downward sloping because of the law of demand. So therefore, the demand curve that the producer faces is going to be that same downward sloping demand curve. So this is different than perfect competition because in perfect competition, the individual producers in the industry faced perfectly elastic horizontal demand curves. But now that the monopolist is the entire industry, that monopolist demand curve is going to be the downward sloping demand curve for the product. And because the demand curve is downward sloping and the law of demand has to be adhered to by that individual producer, if they want to sell more, they have to drop the price. Alright, monopolies arise because of what we call barriers to entry. Barriers to entry provide obstacles that limit the ability of new firms to enter a particular industry and allow existing firms to maintain above normal profits in the long run. The only way a business can earn economic profits, or profits above and beyond a normal rate of return, in the long run, is if they can keep other people out. Because if market supply of the product increases, the price will be driven down and those profits will be, dwindled away, for lack of a better way to describe it. So with a monopolist, if the monopoly is able to earn profits and keep other firms out, they're going to be able to continue earning those profits in the long run. So some of the major barriers to entry that are common are ownership of a key resource, which is rare, and companies that can do this are known as resource monopolies. In the reading in your practice problem packet, De Beers diamonds was used as an example of a resource monopoly. Sometimes we have government-created monopolies where the government gives the exclusive rights to produce a product to one company, like a patent or a copyright. And patents are incentives for companies to invest in research and development and produce or develop and produce new products. Okay, for example, if I owned a prescription drug company and I invested millions of dollars into developing the cure to cancer, and then the day that I marketed that cure, other companies could copy my formula, I wouldn't be very happy. And if businesses knew that could happen, nobody would invest money in developing new and better products. So the fact that the government will award patents and copyrights for certain periods of time to different companies gives companies that incentive to develop new and better products. So patents do expire after usually 7 or 12 years. So if the company hasn't made their money back by then they can apply for an extension. But a patent is a right to have a monopoly or be the sole producer of a product for a certain period of time. And the third type of monopoly is called a natural monopoly, and this is when one firm is most efficient at producing and the costs of production are too high for competitors. So it's actually more efficient to have one large company than several small competing companies. Let me give you an example of this. So one example of a natural monopoly is electricity. If you live in this area, Xcel Energy provides your electricity, or Conexus, or another subsidiary of Xcel. The reason that the government gives Xcel Energy the right to be the natural monopoly in this area is it's safer and more cost efficient to have one company in charge. Because if we had several competing electric companies, we'd have several sets of power lines up and down every street, and the fixed cost of production for those companies, for all those small companies, would be very high, and they'd have to charge very high prices to be able to stay in business. So in industries where fixed costs of production are very high, it makes sense to have one large company rather than several small competing companies. And the government then regulates the price that these natural monopolies can charge. So we'll learn more about that in an upcoming lecture. So, but remember, one thing is for sure: if a firm is truly a monopoly, even if it's only for a certain period of time, market entry is blocked. And so nobody else can come in and compete because the barriers to entry are blocking other people from coming in. Alright, monopolies revenue. A monopolist's marginal revenue is always less than the price of its good because of the downward sloping demand curve. Again, this is going to be different than the situation for a perfectly competitive producer. If you think back to perfect competition, marginal revenue equaled demand, average revenue, and price, Mr. DARP, for the producer. But now, for a monopolistic producer, since their demand curve is downward sloping, marginal revenue is no longer going to be equal to demand, average revenue, and price. Let's take a look at this on the graph. So demand is still the same thing as average revenue or price at which the product is sold, but marginal revenue is going to fall approximately twice as fast as the demand curve. And here's the best way to summarize why this happens. In order to sell more, a firm needs to lower its price. It must lower the price of all units for sale, not just the additional units it would like to sell at the new lower price. So the additional revenue, or the marginal revenue gained for each additional unit of output, will fall as a firm moves down the demand curve. Okay, let's prove that this is true. Let's say this is the downward sloping demand curve for the product, such as what was shown in the graph in the previous slide. And here's the total revenue, which is price times quantity. And from total revenue, we can calculate marginal revenue, change in total revenue over change in output quantity. So the marginal revenue of the first unit of output is 10. As we move from 0 to 1 units of output, our additional revenue will be $10. Marginal revenue of the second unit of output is 8. And then we have 6, 4, 2, and 0. So you can see that every time the price falls by $1, marginal revenue falls by $2, thus proving that marginal revenue falls twice as fast as demand. A monopolist is never going to drop the price into the inelastic portion of the demand curve for the product, because that would cause their total revenue to fall. So think back to learning about elasticity. And so therefore, when marginal revenue equals 0, which is right here in this top graph, that is the most that a price-setting firm would ever choose to sell. Okay, again, because they're not going to increase their output to the point where the price drops into the inelastic portion of the demand curve. Because inelastic demand means that if you lower the price, your total revenue decreases, and that wouldn't be a smart thing. So MR equals 0 is the most a firm would ever sell. Even though where MR equals 0, this is going to be greater than their profit maximizing quantity of output. So in reality, they're really going to be producing somewhere in the elastic portion of the demand curve, depending on where the marginal cost curve and the marginal revenue curves intersect, because where MR equals MC is their profit maximizing level of output. But just know that once we get to where MR equals 0 and enter the inelastic portion of the demand curve, we can pretty much ignore the rest of this because it doesn't matter. Alright, so let's look at how all these curves go together on a hypothetical graph without numbers here. We have the demand, or DARP curve, and then we have marginal revenue falling twice as fast as demand. And we have the marginal cost curve here, which is also the firm's supply curve. So let's take a look at how profit maximizing quantity is identified. We know that profit maximizing output is where MR equals MC, where the benefits of producing another unit of output are exactly equal to the cost of producing that additional unit of output. Now in a monopoly, price exceeds marginal cost, because here where MR equals MC, this is where the marginal revenue curve and marginal cost curve intersect, but not where the price is at, because demand is way up here. So a monopolist, because they have power to do this, is going to charge a price consistent with the profit maximizing quantity at the demand curve. Okay, because why wouldn't they? If they had the power to charge this amount or this higher amount, they're obviously going to charge the higher amount that's consistent with the demand curve at that profit maximizing level of output. So a monopolist profit, again, is what's left over after they have paid all their costs of production. And profit, through substitution, we can say is equal to price minus average total cost times quantity of output. So let's look at that on the graph here. Here's their price at the profit maximizing level of output. And when we put an average total cost curve in there, we can see that average total cost at the profit maximizing level of output is as shown here on the graph, no numbers but hypothetically. So the profit is going to be this area here, price minus average total cost, or what's left over here, multiplied by, oops, I went too fast there, multiplied by the level of output. Alright, let's talk about the inefficiency of a monopoly. Monopoly is opposite of perfect competition, so we know perfectly competitive industries are perfectly efficient, both allocatively and productively. Monopoly is not going to be allocatively efficient because they charge a price above marginal cost, and they produce less than the socially efficient quantity of output. So let's take a look at that on the graph. Here's their profit maximizing quantity of output and price, as shown in previous slides. And here is the allocatively efficient quantity and price, where supply, or marginal cost, for the industry equals demand for the industry. Because this graph of the producer is the same thing as the graph for the entire industry, since the producer is the industry. It makes up the entire industry. So you can see that at the allocatively efficient quantity of output, here's consumer and here's producer surplus, but at the profit maximizing level of output, here's consumer and producer surplus. And because a monopoly sets price above marginal cost, it is allocatively inefficient and places a wedge. This wedge, which we can give a title to because we've learned about this previously, deadweight loss, okay, causes the quantity sold to fall short of the social optimum. So again, here's that deadweight loss, and that proves that this firm's allocatively efficient, or this industry is allocatively efficient, because it's not producing at the allocatively efficient quantity. Alright, this firm is also not productively or technically efficient because they're not producing at the base of their average total cost curve, like a perfect competitor would. So let's take a look at that on the graph. Here's their profit maximizing level of output. Here is the quantity of productive efficiency, where marginal cost intersects average total cost at its base. And you can see that those two quantities are not the same, so they're not productively efficient either. Now, quickly here, the short run, in the short run, the monopolist, like a perfect competitor, can earn economic profit, but will shut down unless average revenue covers average variable cost. More often, a monopolist is going to earn profits even in the short run because they don't have competition. But the difference between monopoly and perfect competition in the long run is that the monopolist, unlike the perfect competitor, can continue to earn economic profit as long as the entry of new firms is blocked. So as long as they maintain their monopoly status, they can continue to earn those profits because nobody can break into the industry and increase market supply and drive that price down and create competition for them. So in summary, we've seen today how monopoly truly is opposite of perfect competition in almost every way. We've seen that the graph is different, we've seen that the characteristics are different, and we've seen that the levels of efficiency are different. So hopefully this gave you some a glance into the monopoly industry.